Hey everybody, it's Steve Halley here with the Family Peace Initiative's Facilitators Tool Chest blog. Um, Doing things a little bit different this time. I'm excited to be able to bring in Tish Taylor, who's our Assistant Director, and Audra Fullerton, who's our Director of Training and doubling as the Director of our Peaceful Families program for incarcerated women. And we thought we'd all come together today just to talk about the beliefs and how we approach the beliefs that come up in our programs, in our group rooms, and just kind of have a conversation about that. And so I'm really excited to be able to include Tish and Audra in this Facilitators Tool Chest episode. Last month, we talked a little bit about addressing pro abuse beliefs in our group room, and we wanted to dig into that a little bit deeper today. Without further ado, Tish, why don't you give everybody kind of a quick overview on the River of Cruelty, and then we'll get into the beliefs box. Take it away, Tish.
And so the river of cruelty, really, it's just a model that demonstrates how cruelty is passed from person to person and from generation to generation. And I'll take you a little bit through my river to kind of give a little bit of context as to how this works. And so really, it starts with, in our childhood, we experience something really cruel or something that's just cruel, period. Right. And so for me, I think about witnessing domestic violence. And when we experience cruelty as a child, we can't have that experience outside of our emotions. It's an emotional experience. And so we talk about how that emotionally impacts us. And so what I think specifically about witnessing domestic violence, for me, I felt small. I couldn't do anything about that situation. I felt weak. I felt stupid because I couldn't figure out how to get that to stop happening. Right. And so we talk about those things as being our adverse feelings, right? The feelings that we never want to feel. And when we have no idea how to manage those feelings or what to do with those feelings, then we have to find ways to survive them. And so we develop defense systems, ways to kind of tuck or push or put those feelings away, right? And so for me, when I think about ways that I survived feeling small and stupid and weak when I had nobody there to show me, to help me understand how to resolve those things, I got really guarded. I started acting really tough. I started getting really sharp with my tongue so that my words would really cut. And I started not caring, right? I didn't care. I didn't care how I was acting. I didn't care how I affected other people. Essentially, my empathy was dulled. And as a result of that, there were consequences that I experienced. Right now, I absolutely was using the defenses because it helped me to survive, not having to feel small, stupid, and weak. But it came at a cost, right? And so, as a part of using those defenses, it really helped me to push people away or keep people at a distance. It also helped me to keep all my relationships around me very superficial. So nothing was too deep, nothing was too intimate, nothing felt too risky, right? And so that cost me because I also wasn't letting anybody in, right? And so nobody really knew me or knew what was going on with me. And so it put a lot of pressure on me to deal with things alone. Well, in going through all of those things, we develop beliefs about the cruelty we experience, belief about our feelings, beliefs about what's going on and why it's happening. And when I think about that, if I kind of just put it down in a nutshell, some of the beliefs that I really developed coming out of that situation and experiencing that situation, this whole idea of needing to use these defenses, I thought I was powerful and I was important and I was going to show people just how true that was. But really underneath that, having experienced and witnessed the domestic violence, things that were happening much, much more out of my control and nothing I could do about that. The reality was I was also feeling underneath it all very much so powerless and like I didn't matter. And so those were huge pieces of what was going on and shaping the context of my world. And so in thinking about that, we want to elaborate more on how that works, how we develop these beliefs over the period of time, and what that means when we're looking at that through the context as a child, as opposed to maybe how that can be much different once we look at that later in life. Audra, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I would love to. Tish, thank you. And I love the River of Cruelty model because it does exactly what Tish was just talking about. It gives us a way to acknowledge the breadth of our experience, all the pieces that Tish just walked us through that can apply to all of us and all of our stories. But it's also an opportunity to slow it down and say, wait a second, how did I get from small and weak and stupid feelings, and feelings come and go? How did I get from there to I'm powerless and I don't matter? Or for me, I have no value. How do we get there? So I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think about it this way. We know that most of that work, the work of going from those adverse emotions to really grounding those things in beliefs, most of that work happens in our childhood. Most of that happens before puberty and before. There's lots of experiences that absolutely impact us after it. But when we're talking about ways that our beliefs really implant themselves in our self-image, we're talking about puberty and before. And children are like scientists. They're hardwired to figure out their world. We're hardwired to collect data and to sort things out and to figure out, who am I in all of this? And how do I stay safe? And how do I get what I need? And a very wise woman was known to say, children are fantastic observers, but terrible interpreters. So when we think about children experiencing cruelty, they're absolutely observing real things that are happening to them. And just like Tish says, there are all sorts of things that we put into play to survive that. But in addition to surviving it, we are trying to make sense of it. So what does a scientist do when there's a question? They run an experiment. And for these little scientists in the river of cruelty, the question is that feeling, that experience that starts as a feeling. I feel small, I feel weak, I feel stupid, I feel invisible. And it gets put into the experiment as, am I weak? Am I small? Am I invisible? And then we go about collecting data. So if I'm interested in figuring out, am I weak? Then I'm going to be watching. I'm going to be watching how people respond to me. I'm going to be watching how people act with other people who look weak. I'm going to be watching everything. I'm going to be observing, because children are fantastic observers. But no matter how amazing children are, it's not possible for children to totally know the whole situation. They might not understand that, yes, they're home alone all by themselves because their parent has to work. They just experience being alone all by themselves. And so they're experiencing they're running these experiments and collecting data. And when we collect enough data, then that is the process of moving from a feeling to a belief. Oh, I've collected enough data that proves that, yep, I am weak. I don't have to question it. I don't have to wonder. I just know to the core of my being that I am weak. And once we get to that point, once we get to the point where it is a belief, then we've got some work to do to figure out, how am I going to let that continue to run my life? Am I going to work hard to just show the world how weak I am? Or am I going to work hard to hide from the world this truth that feels crappy? Or am I going to challenge the belief with my 40-year-old eyes and go back and run some of those experiments again? So when we think about beliefs, it's rich territory for understanding our story, understanding not just the truths that we feel, because they are absolutely truths from our experience, but can we be open to challenging some of those truths, collecting more data that may not have been accessible to us in the first experience, and reimagining what beliefs might be possible for us.
Audra, thanks so much for that. I just appreciate the way you described that. You know, for years, we spent our time trying to address the beliefs that people held in their adulthood without going back to the roots of how these scientists adopted these beliefs, as you said, you know, sometime before puberty, and then accepting them as fact just went on through their lives. And so things started changing for us as we started recognizing that someone who was trying to make somebody else feel weak was really running away from their own feelings of not wanting to feel weak. And so they would give it away to somebody else. You know, they recognized that they didn't want to have those feelings. And so they just gave them away. And being able to connect people's entire story of how they adopted and acquired the evidence that made these beliefs appear to be factual was a big move forward for us. You know, it's been really fun talking about this, and there's a whole wealth of information about how do you do this? How do you have a conversation with somebody where they can identify the belief of, well, I'm the man of the house, and in a few questions be able to talk about with them the dangers of not being in control, the dangers of feeling that somebody else is going to dominate and control them, and where that came from can be a very powerful conversation. Tish, do you want to get the last word in, and we'll just kind of wrap this up and look forward to doing maybe something again next month?
Thanks for joining in and listening in. We're glad to be able to provide this information to you.